I'm not a political comedian. You probably noticed from that shark fingering stuff earlier. Yeah. This guy's ready for Radio 4. I'm not a political person, to tell you the truth. My friend said to me recently, he said, Josh, what would you do if you were Prime Minister for a day? I was like, Prime Minister for a day? Probably not a lot. Not much you can do in a day, is there? Probably get there, get my login sorted for the computer, have lunch. Last day, probably get an early finish, if I can. Look, I'm no good with those hypothetical situations. I've got quite a literal imagination. Same reason me and my wife can't do role play in the bedroom. So I get way too into it. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. What's this guy's backstory? What makes him tick? Why did he want to get into the fire service in the first place? She hates it. She's like, Josh, relax, come to bed. I'm like, come to bed? There's an electric blanket on that thing. That is an accident waiting to happen. A satin nightgown? Really? You might as well douse yourself in petrol, think on. Just go around checking the detectors for the rest of the evening. It kills the vibe, if I'm honest. I'd actually say, believe it or not, that my wife is less political than me. She read an article to me out loud recently, which she believed was about a man called Troy Backbenchers. Unbelievable. We get 2 votes in our household, both wasted. Unbelievable. But since we had our little boy, we had a boy, since we had him, we started keeping across world affairs, keeping kind of tabs on politics and what's happening in the world, because we want to know what kind of world we've brought our little boy into. And I've looked into some stuff, and listen, I've got to tell you, Putin, not my cup of tea. I do not like that guy's vibe at all. I'm sorry to use this language, I'm going to use the word toxic. No, we've got to call it out, lads, when we see it, actually. And we've got to stop him. We've got to stop Putin. I really believe this. I saw a graphic, right? It showed a map of the UK. Showed that if Putin dropped a bomb on London, that the blast would reach up as far as the Midlands, where we live. And I saw that and I was like, fuck. We've got to do something. Because I am not taking in Cockney refugees. I'm sorry, I'm not doing it. I'm not. I've got a spare room. If a Ukrainian family need it, they can have it. I'm not having some prick from Shoreditch moving in with me. Tell me I'm making coffees wrong. I'm not having it. Grown men skateboarding across the border. No, get off that. Get off. Disembark, for God's sake. I pray it doesn't come to that. Man, I could never be in the army. I'd be bloody rubbish in the army. I couldn't even be in the army reserves. Whatever they do. Army reserves, I think they fight against the smaller nations midweek. I think that's what they do. I think the gaffer comes in, he's like, listen lads, it's a big one, we've got Afghanistan away on Saturday. I'm going to rest you lads. I'm going to bring some civil servants in for San Marino on Tuesday. I think that's how it works.